Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette. It's 101. Sort of amazing. This is actually the 100th episode because I forgot number 16. So that's 100 papers read and reviewed of some sort. So let's do another. Why not? Yeah. So here we are on Phil Papers. I did one from Thought this morning because I couldn't find a journal article I could read. You know what I could do? Could try Phil Archive and see what they have, just what's been uploaded to Phil Papers, which of course is not the full range of things that are available. It's just what Phil, this like sort of website, which does do a very good job really of getting stuff, has. So let's see what we got on the front page of Phil Archive. Philosophy and Education, Archives of Neurology, forthcoming in Noose. Excuse me. I'm gonna look teaching in philosophical praxis. You gotta look for something reasonably short, otherwise I lose my mind after a while. A partial defense of descriptive evidentialism about intuitions. Ethics of ectogenesis. I was just talking about this stuff. It was from the same issue of from bioethics as the other paper, so that was a group of things. How to think critically about the common past, communism, and nostalgia in post-revolutionary Romania. Cool. Measuring the consequences of rules. And Utilitas. I haven't done anything from Utilitas. Okay, that's actually not a bad idea. Maybe I could check out that journal, because that's I know that philosophy journal. I've seen it before. Not academic, entrepreneurship journal. Let's see, what else do we got? Okay, so that's it for the front page of this. So let's take a look. Alright, why not try this one? Okay. Looks good enough. Let's go for it. So, if you show up and you want to grab a link to the paper when you're live, just type exclamation point paper in the chat box, this right here. And this link will pop back up, so you can then just grab the paper live. Of course, it'll be in the show notes when it gets posted later. So, cool. Alright, let's go for it. In measuring the consequences of rules, Holly Smith presents two problems involving the indeterminacy of compliance, which she takes to be fatal for all forms of rule-utilitarianism. I beg to differ, and in this reply I will attempt to dispel both problems. Smith's first problem involves the supposedly indeterminate consequences of accepting moral codes with conditionalized rules. Such rules were proposed by rule utilitarians to deal with cases where securing a public good requires most but not all agents to contribute. Was this a tragedy of the commons? Something like that. One example of this is the river pollution case discussed by Smith, Hooker, and Lyons. Three industrialists own factories bordering the river, you among them. So I'm now an industrialist. That's amazing. If two or more of the industrialists discharge waste into the river, it will be severely polluted. But if one or none discharge waste, the others burn their waste and hence do not discharge. The river will remain healthy and no other environmental damage will be done. To deal with such cases, rule utilitarians proposed using conditionalized moral codes like the following. Rule 1. If two other industrialists are discharging waste, you ought to discharge. If one other industrialist is discharging waste while the other is burning waste, you ought to burn your waste. If no other industrialist is discharging waste, you ought to discharge your waste. Smith finds such codes problematic because they may have no determined expected value at all. Before examining her claim, it would be useful to recall the definition of an expected value or expected utility. Suppose an act A has several different outcomes. To find the expected value of A, we multiply the value, or utility, of each outcome with its corresponding probability of occurring given A, and then add up all the products of these multiplications. In this formula, the probabilities used can be understood as the probability estimates justified by the available evidence. In the rule-utilitarian context, the expected values are most often used to evaluate the acceptance of a moral code. For instance, the expected value of universally accepting code C1 is obtained by multiplying the value of each outcome that might result from universally accepting C1 with the probability of that outcome occurring, and then adding up all the products of such multiplications. Reading the footnote there. Returning to the river pollution case, notice that two patterns of action might emerge where there is universal acceptance of the proposed conditional code. Case 1, all three industrialists discharge waste. Case 2, two industrialists burn waste and thus do not discharge, and one discharges waste. Case 1, all three industrialists follow Rule 1 of the code. In Case 2, the two industrialists who are burning waste follow Rule 2, while the one who discharges follows Rule 3. Case 1 and 2, however, have very different expected values. Case 1 results in a polluted river and low expected value, while Case 2 results in a clean river and one industrial saving on cost by discharging waste, thus having a high expected value. Smith states that since either of these patterns of action, note Case 2 has several distinct realizations, involves universal acceptance of the code but has very different consequences, it is indeterminate what the consequences would be of universal acceptance of the code. I will focus on the epistemic version of this indeterminacy problem, which charges that we are unable to ascertain whether Case 1 or 2 will obtain, and hence cannot evaluate a moral code with conditionalized rules. We were talking about, at least I read a paper, nothing's that long ago, I mean, quarantine started last month, but where they were having the similar sort of problem where they had different rules and they would come out with different expected utilities. And the issue was really that there was two different methods of measuring going on. And so if you've got different sort of ways of understanding utility, then you're not going to have any one way of comparing outcomes. So there is that sort of, I think there might be something like that, because then you could get like circular utilities, like this is better than this, and this is better than this, and this is better than this, but the better than was different. And so 1 could be better than 2, and 2 could be better than 3, but then 3 would be better 1, but somewhere along the way, the transitivity would be slightly different. So this is a common sort of problem. Let's see what this author has to say. My proposed solution is simple. The rule utilitarian just needs to perform another iteration of expected value calculations in the face of such indeterminacy. Okay, so this person is going to resolutely force through one universal sort of evaluation. Okay. From the usual calculations, we already have the expected values of Case 1 and Case 2. The expected value of the conditionalized moral code can then be obtained by multiplying the expected value of each case with the probability of that case occurring, and then adding up the products of these multiplications. Smith might object that this solution does not eliminate the uncertainty. We still do not know if Case 1 or 2 will actually obtain. But to single out this uncertainty and demand that we resolve it without using expected utility seems quite ad hoc. This is especially so given that Smith already acknowledges the appropriateness of using expected utility in the face of other uncertainties. For instance, the optimum rate rule utilitarian that she proposes in the same paper uses expected utility to deal with uncertainty about how the world, understood at everything other than the moral agent themselves, will turn out. Hence, it is unclear how she could object to my using expected utility for yet another source of uncertainty, namely the one involving Case 1 and Case 2. Okay, so I guess in this literature you can force some sort of expected utility through because of the presuppositions of utilitarianism. So there is an underlying fundamental expected utility function somewhere. That's interesting. Okay. Smith might also object that there is no way to obtain reasonable values for the probabilities of Case 1 and 2 occurring. Without any information, this is indeed a problem because we could take Case 1 and 2 to be equally possible, assign half probability to each, or we could take Case 1 and the 3 different realizations of Case 2 to be equally possible, hence assigning 0.25 probability to each. Both methods seem equally appropriate, yet they recommend very different sets of probabilities. Fortunately, we can avoid this by gathering empirical evidence for the respective probabilities. I'm not sure about that. Let's see. For instance, we could conduct an experiment where participants are given the river pollution case, or a suitably general one, and are told to follow the conditionalized moral code. See, here exactly is my problem. I am not an industrialist. Why would an industrialist follow? Many times, it seems to be more usual than not when I think the right thing to do is not exactly what the people in charge seem to do. So why you want to see what my opinion is versus what the people in charge's opinion is, I don't think that's a good way to measure what will actually happen. I don't think that's a realistic understanding. I mean, more seriously, it's the same problem of like a lot of psychological studies were done. I forget what the term is, but they're basically upper class white European, like 20-year-olds or whatever, is like the vast majority of what psych studies are doing. So everything is sort of focused on that demographic because that's who the researchers have access to. Some like well-funded first world college kids. So I don't know if you can actually get the right probabilities for what people will do here, because it just doesn't seem that the everyday person is your everyday industrialist. Okay, that's actually a minor, little, it's over here, like the video is a minor complaint. But yeah, so I'm not an industrialist. I don't know what that means, to be an industrialist that has a factory that dumps into a river. Continuing. Some proportion of cases 1 and 2, including 2's different realizations, will result, and we can use this proportion as a guide to their respective probabilities, given a large number of trials and sufficiently representative participants. I don't know who counts as an industrialist here, who is a representative participant. In fact, economists have conducted experiments that are tantalizingly similar to what I'm envisioning. For an example, see Cadsby and Mains. That I'd like to take a look at. That'd be fun. Social experiments are not perfectly analogous to the rule-utilitarian's case, but they at least indicate how probabilities used by my solution might be obtained. Okay, so you could actually go see, given people's what are you measuring here? You're measuring how they react given certain rules and conditions and payoffs, and you're seeing if how people act given certain payoffs actually cohere to what you think the probability of the distribution of people following certain different rule sets. I worry slightly that the setup will like sort of force the people into certain sort of mindsets. So it's not just that you have non-industrialists taking the test, it's that I don't know if like sort of the setup would have to be done carefully so you are not biasing the participants. But like it seems like there might be bias in how this is set up, but I'm sure the experimentalist would have to figure that one out. That is a concern for me. Of course, Smith might continue to press the objection in situations where we cannot identify the probabilities involved yet, because it might be hard to actually pin these down. I think that such situations are highly unlikely, given that there will always be some relevant empirical evidence that bears on the probabilities involved. Recall that these probabilities are simply probability estimates justified by the available evidence. Thus, as long as there is some available evidence, we will be able to identify the probabilities, however imprecise our estimates might be. Well, if all evidence is decent, then you're going to get something, but I don't know what you're going to understand by it. But suppose such a situation obtains, the rule-utilitarian might still be able to reasonably evaluate moral rules in other ways. Yeah, that's true. For instance, they might follow rules and take a max-min approach, or we choose a set of moral rules whose worst possible outcome creates more utility than the worst possible outcome of any other set, which does not need the probabilities of any of the possible outcomes. Yeah, a little idealistic, but it might, then you'd get at least a baseline for certain things that don't rely on the vagaries of experimentation. So you'd have multiple ways of getting a baseline. Okay, that's fine then. Regardless of how rule utilitarians deal with the situation where the probabilities cannot be identified, it is important to note that the problems pertaining to probabilities are not specific to the compliance issues that Smith raises. Rather, they are general problems that arise from the expected utility approach. We could just as easily formulate the same problems in terms of the probabilities of the various ways the world could turn out, for instance. Thus, I believe that Smith is in fact committed to some way of resolving such problems, given that she already allows using expected utility to deal with uncertainty about how the world would turn out. Again, this is returning to the sort of like the baseline of this area, so I guess you need to have some sort of baseline with expected utility. Okay. Smith's second problem raises a different kind of indeterminacy, and it is as follows. Suppose we have a moral code C2 that requires agents to repay their debts, and we want to find its expected value at 60% acceptance. This just means that where 60% of all agents accept C2's requirements that they repay their debts. The standard way to do this is to multiply the value of each possible outcome resulting from 60% acceptance of C2 with that outcome's probability of occurring, and then add up all the products of these multiplications. However, if 60% of agents accept C2, it means 40% of agents reject it. And this 40% will likely reject the code in different ways. Some might reject it by paying less than they owe, some by paying nothing at all, and some by killing the person to whom the money is owed. That would seem a little drastic, but okay. Depending on which pattern of rejection obtains, a different set of consequences will result, changing the overall consequence of 60% acceptance. The rule utilitarian who is concerned with such overall consequences thus also has to determine the pattern of which pattern of rejection will actually obtain. But Smith states that it is impossible to do so, and hence creating an additional problem of indeterminacy. Okay, so you have to do you have to figure out what the 100% of people are actually going to do to actually get the outcomes you want. Alright, my reply is similar. The rule utilitarian simply has to perform another iteration of expected value calculations, this time over the possible pattern of rejection. From this we can obtain the expected value of 40% rejection and add it to the expected value of 60% acceptance to get the overall expected value. Yeah, but what does the expected value amount to then? If like some people are paying and then some people are committing murder, how do you like make that on the same scale? It's like, okay, so this guy paid $5 and this person murdered somebody. How is that like? What's the expected value of like murdering somebody over $5? I don't know. As with my treatment of the first problem, we could conduct experiments to guide us in assigning the respective probabilities, or failing that, use some other reasonable approach like max and min. Again, it seems like in this literature you can force through I don't know. It's like, it seems like you can force through different you can force the person to use a certain sort of utility function. And so if you can force them to have a utility function, then you can force them to get results that like can be worked with. So again, it doesn't have to be the positive stuff. You can force through the one on the rejection. What will the utility function be of all the ways it could be rejected? So really it's not a rejection, it's you're just doing it over the entire set of people. Okay. In general, the rule utilitarian can probably use expected utility in the face of any kind of uncertainty. Yeah, so 100%. Such uncertainty is likely to arise in many cases, extending to everything outside the rule utilitarian's direct control. Teaching a code to 100% of the population will not ensure that any determinate percentage accepts it. Acceptance does not translate into any determinate percent of compliance, and as Smith's two problems show, compliance does not translate into any determinate set of actual consequences. The appropriate response to all this uncertainty is to use expected utility with iteration if necessary. Computationally, this will be extremely complicated. Yeah, I don't know if you're ever going to get this, especially because the effects extend across time and because each agent can have an effect on others through her acceptance and compliance. At some point, I expect that rule utilitarians will no longer perform simple calculations and instead resort to statistical simulations of moral agents being taught one moral code or another. Much like in weather simulations, these moral code simulations will yield a set of outcomes with their respective frequencies, which can then be used in rule utilitarian calculations. The idea, however, is the same. We know that a prior state of teaching, acceptance, compliance, or whatever could lead to several possible outcomes with the respective probabilities, and we use that knowledge to evaluate various moral rules as best we can. I'm a little worried here, actually, because how do you know then that they're following the rules anymore? If this is like you teach them the stuff and then you've only got some sort of statistical outcome, then basically you only have the statistical outcome. You don't really have the rules anymore, do you? Like, you only know that you taught them some stuff, but if you have so much uncertainty here, how do you actually know that they're following the rules and just not following this statistical norm stuff? I don't know. That seems, yeah, I don't know. Independent of the solutions I offered earlier, there is one further reason to dismiss Smith's problems, and it is that they prove too much. This is because moral rules are not the only thing that fall prey to Smith's two problems. Laws are susceptible too. For instance, Smith's first problem would apply equally to a law requiring at least one parent to take 10 days of parental leave each year. Her second problem would similarly apply to a law which states that offenders of a smoking ban have to pay either $500 or go to jail. I mean, nowadays it'd be like, you didn't social distance. You have to pay $500 or go to jail, in which you're not social distancing anymore. Such examples could be multiplied with ease. In general, the evaluation of various laws seem plagued by the same epistemic indeterminacy that Smith finds problematic, along with the intertemporal and interpersonal effects that exasperate such indeterminacy. This indeterminacy also extends across the stages of teaching, acceptance, and compliance, just like in the case of moral rules. And yet, I suspect that most moral philosophers do not take such indeterminacy to fatally undermine the evaluation of laws. How then could we think that it compromises the rule-utilitarian evaluation of moral rules? Okay, fine. Just because yeah. So it's this is expanding it to apply to just sort of like legal cases. Yeah, the law doesn't apply exactly and never does. There's a lot of uncertainty, but of course we still use the law, like legal rules, and so why should the utilitarian fall to the same indeterminacies that the seems to be accepted when it comes to law? That's fair. Okay, so it was a short paper, a nice little response piece. Yeah, nice little response piece. I mean, I got some questions mostly because I don't know enough about this sort of utilitarianism, but yeah, like exactly who counts as a representative participant if you're going to understand how people are following rules. But other than that, a nice little piece, and you know what? That'll be it for now, I guess, unless anyone has any questions out there in Twitchland watching now. I'll be back tomorrow morning with another review. See if I can find something a little bit long. Maybe I'll try and find something a little bit longer. Although I did some longer pieces otherwise, recently anyway. Okay, so have a good night, stay safe everybody, and be well. Ciao.